Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the RocknRoll Beer Guy Podcast. This episode is brought to you by Audible. If you go to audibletrial.com/RRBG, you can sign up there for a free 30-day trial, and you get a free audiobook from their selection of over 180,000 titles. This podcast is also brought to you by Blue Apron. If you go to rocknrollbeerguy.wordpress.com, you can click there on a link that we have that says Blue Apron, and you'll get $30 off your first order and free shipping. In this episode, I talked to Brian Cook. He's the bassist for many bands like Russian Circles, These Arms Are Snakes, Sumac, and Botch. We geek out over some craft beer, talk a lot about how he perfected his bass tone and working with some of these bands. It was a lot of fun talking to him, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers.
Hello.
Hello.
How's it going?
Good. Had to get this laptop restarted. It's about time to upgrade.
No worries. I feel like a grandpa right now trying to figure out new technology.
You never used Skype before, huh?
I had it like ages ago, and it always dropped calls on me. Like whenever I was in Europe, I was using it, and then like FaceTime came out, and I was like, I'm ditching Skype. I'm just gonna do FaceTime, and have not had it since. So it's been a while.
Well, FaceTime is Apple exclusive, though, right?
Yeah, I was just using it to contact like my husband was on tour. That's why I got Skype to begin with. And like, we both have iPads or laptops or whatever, so we can just do this, and this will be easier. And
cool. Welcome, everyone, to the RocknRoll Beer Guy Podcast. I'm here with Brian Cook of many, many bands that I enjoy, such as Russian Circles, These Arms Are Snakes, Sumac, Botch. Am I missing one? I feel like I'm missing one.
I feel like you've got the important ones. There's others, but they don't need to be mentioned. So
you sound upset about it. Like, I don't need to mention these. There were mistakes in the past.
Well, no, it's everything that I've been a part of, I'm proud of in some capacity, but there's also just, if we want to go down the list, there's a million weird little things I've been a part of in some capacity, and those four are probably the ones people are most familiar with. So,
how long have you been playing bass, or how long have you been doing music, really?
About 25 years, I guess.
Wow.
Started when I was 14, and like it was one of those things, bought a bass and then was in a band a month later, but didn't know what I was doing, and haven't stopped being in bands since then.
Damn. What was the first bass you bought?
I think it was a company called Anchor. It was a really cheap bass. I was living in Hawaii at the time. I was a military kid.
Oh, okay.
And, it was like a $90 bass at the local music shop, and, I was saving up allowance money for it. So that was the first one. And then, sold it when, we moved to Washington and bought a new Fender JP90 when we moved to Tacoma. And then that was my principal bass up through most of the Botch years until it was stolen out of our van in Stockholm on our first European tour.
Well, that sucks.
It was a blessing in disguise, really.
I had someone message me to ask you, how many Gibson grabbers do you own?
I really only have one. I have I have one original grabber, which is the one that I bought after the JP90 was stolen, and I pretty much played that one the remainder of the Botch days and into These Arms Are Snakes until it was just totally thrashed and destroyed. And then I got a group of reissues, and I used it for a little bit. And then I have two rippers, which are kind of like grabbers. But yeah, I have like four Gibsons altogether, and they're all just so beat up that none of them are really playable. So
Jeez.
That's when I made the move to one of those electrical guitar company all aluminum basses, just because I figured aluminum was a lot harder to destroy than wood.
Yeah, and I mean you have been nonstop touring and playing in bands the entirety of your music career. It's not like you've taken a break or anything. A lot of people, you start off with one band and then the band breaks up and you take a break for a few years, but you've been nonstop.
Yeah, they've all kind of wound up overlapping a little bit. So, yeah, there really hasn't been a break at all.
Damn. Is that? Are you still happy? Is it not wearing on you at this point that you're not taking any breaks ever? Or is that something that your lifestyle is? You're just used to it now.
I wouldn't say I'm used to it. I think there's still a certain amount of inertia involved with things. So if I'm on tour, it's very easy to continue being on tour. There's always a little bit of homesickness and wanting to come home and all that. But in general, you're in constant motion when you're on tour, so it's very easy to just kind of keep going. And then when you get home from tour, and this is kind of where I'm at right now, because I just got off 6 weeks with Mastodon, with Russian Circles, it's really almost kind of more emotionally draining to stop, just because I just get crazy cabin fever, and it's like I know there's all these things I should be doing while I'm at home, but the fact that there's no deadline for anything, it just kind of winds up being me fidgeting around the apartment, trying to figure out how to best occupy my time. And it takes a good couple of weeks to get back into the groove of being at home and having sort of a home life routine. And then, once you kind of get in that groove, then it's like, I have to go on tour. Like I have so many things I need to finish up at home. And, you get used to the more sedentary lifestyle, and
it's a never-ending struggle.
Yeah, it's easier when it's all or nothing, really. It's like you can do all your touring in one chunk, that's great, but I think if we were to do that, we would also just all come home so battered and worn out that wouldn't be any fun either. So we're still trying to find the right balance of keeping busy but not constantly interrupting our lives.
Right. Yeah. Well, to kind of shift into a different direction, because I feel that we're going to talk about your career and your music a lot more, but I wanted to touch on beer real quick, since it is a beer podcast and all that. Being on tour with Mastodon, I know Braun is a big beer geek. I don't know if you've had a chance to hang with him during his beer tastings backstage and stuff like that. Are you a big beer geek?
I am a very big fan of beer. The funny thing, I think Braun and I have very different drinking sort of rules. I know Braun doesn't drink before he plays at all, and then afterwards he'll unwind and have a few drinks. And I'm more inclined to have a few drinks before I play so that I'm not nervous and I feel kind of loose and limber on stage. And then afterwards I try to be a bit more responsible, because usually if, we're headlining and then we finish playing and I have to go and pack up and load out the van, and there's like a good hour and a half of work to be done. So there's not really time to drink. And then after that, it's like, well, is it worth having another beer just to go to bed in an hour? Or, it's just easier to have a drink early on in the night. But, so on the Mastodon thing, it's like I was drinking early in the night, and then Braun was sort of waiting till afterwards, I think, primarily. So
yeah.
There's a little crossover towards the end when everyone was, more knowing the days were winding down and, hangouts were, running out. So we had a few hangout nights then, but primarily no, our drinking patterns did not align.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was doing the band thing, I mean, I had both. I don't know. We would drink before and after, which was probably a mistake.
That was definitely my vibe in the past, and then I realized I couldn't sustain that kind of that lifestyle.
Oh yeah, man! As we get older, it's a lot harder. Hangovers are a lot more brutal than they used to be.
Yeah, and they evolve. They change over time. It's like, oh, I don't throw up anymore. This is great. Like, oh, but I have crippling migraines, and then it's like,
yes, exactly.
Oh, I don't get migraines anymore. I just have weird anxiety and depression for the next 48 hours. It's like, oh, it's like every time you think you've kind of finally figured it out, it shifts on you a little bit. You're like, oh, all right, I still have to be a responsible person. There's always going to be consequences. So.
Yeah. In the beginning, man, when we toured the U.S., I remember it was just nonstop drinking. We were drinking instead of eating at that point, because we would have whatever per diem, $10, $20, and it was always that decision, well, do we get drunk or should we get some food? And it's like, let's just drink beer. Who cares? It's food, right? So, So what are some of your favorite styles of beer, since you said you're a fan of beer?
Currently, I guess I'm kind of into IPAs, which I feel like is, I don't know, a bad cliche. But, I kind of hated IPAs for so long just because I think I was just exposed to the wrong ones. And then there's just been a few that people have turned me on to that have kind of changed my perspective on it. I think it's especially a lot of the sort of Midwestern IPAs, like Lakefront. That's a really good one that I really like. Those are the ones that are a little less sticky and a little more kind of floral and citrusy.
Gotcha.
I've kind of come around to those quite a bit. Like the Lagunitas IPA and kind of those more sort of standard Sierra Nevada style ones. I'm not as wild about.
Yeah, those are a little more bitter and like you said, piney, and it could be a turnoff for some people. Just it's too aggressive. The Northeast has been coming up with some new. The haze craze is what they're calling it, but they do these unfiltered IPAs that are more akin to like juice. They're like pineapple juice or mango juice or something like that. Have you had any of those?
Yeah, I definitely like the cloudier IPAs. I feel are usually a lot more my speed for whatever reason. I think they tend to have a bit more going on than just being sort of like bitter and piney. And that's a lot more my vibe. So, but it's also, I feel like a lot of it's kind of like a seasonal thing where when it's spring or fall, like the IPAs are sort of nice. They seem to fit the weather well. But then when summer comes around, it's I'm happy just to drink something lighter and do
like pilsners or lagers.
Yeah, pilsners. Man, I hated pilsners for a long time, and then now the last couple times I've gone to Europe, I've really kind of come around to pilsners just because maybe it's just in Europe there's a bit more variety and they tend to be. I don't know. You can taste a bit more of the variation in it, but also it's a lot.
Well, they do it better.
Yeah, imagine that Europeans and knowing their beer. But I think they're also easier just to kind of like drink casually, over the course of an evening. Whereas an IPA, it's like you have a couple of them and then you're kind of done. Otherwise, you get too drunk or you get kind of like that medicine mouth where it's
especially the double IPAs that are like they taste great but they're 9.5% and you're wasted after 3 of them.
yeah there's the 6-point resin up here, which is kind of that way. I'm not sure if it's double or if it's just like
resin's up there. I think it's like 8%.
It's like that's a good beer, but yeah, it's like you have one and you're like, all right, now I have to switch gears to something a little more mellow. Otherwise, I'm going to be in trouble.
They even have a double version of that, the high res, which is like 10 or 11% or some crazy shit. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's, I think maybe I just need to learn how to drink beer like that. I mean, I think it sounds like you and Brian kind of have it dialed in a bit more, but when Sumac was out on the East Coast and we were out with JJL, we stayed at Dave Whitty's house.
Oh, Whitty.
Yeah, he's like, I have some beer, we can do like a little beer tasting. I was like, all right, this sounds like trouble, but let's do it. And then it was literally him just like opening one bottle of beer and then like pouring it into, a bunch of shot glasses, and everyone kind of sits around and tastes it. And I'm like, oh, this is like grown up drinking. This is like, this is how like responsible like connoisseurs do it. And this is how you drink, a beer that's in the double digits of, alcohol content. So I think it's a different realm to than just being a band dude that has, a tray filled with ice and, a case of beer thrown into it. So
right. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. That's how I do it. And, I've also experienced the Dave Whitty sleepover bottle, tasting, which is great. He just doesn't stop. Like, I remember being like super late. It was like 3 or 4 in the morning, and he just kept, let's try this one. I'm like, dude, I'm good. I think I'm ready for bed.
Yeah, it was still a very responsible evening. I think we went through, I don't know, we probably went through 4 or 5 bottles, but it was, between, I don't know, like half a dozen people. So it wasn't anything crazy, So it's a good time. It's a good experience.
That's awesome. Yeah, man. Whitty, to me, is one of the most knowledgeable beer guys in the music industry. Him and Braun both know their shit. I started, No, that's a lie. I started music first, but then kind of fell into the beer world and the beer industry for 6 or 7 years, and the music's taken a back seat for now until we can figure something out, because everybody's in a different state now, so we're still trying to figure out that technology to keep us all together.
Yeah, I think technology is making it easier, but there's still something to be said for having everyone in one room at one time. Like both my bands involve everyone living in different states, or in some instances different countries, but it's still the most productive when everyone's all in one spot at one time, hammering things out. So it can be tricky.
Yeah. I mean, you get the vibe together. You all get on that same page. You can't really beat getting together in a room and just writing together, as opposed to shipping, sending each other tracks or whatever ideas. It can get lost in translation, like a text message. You might send somebody a text message that says, fuck you, and you're joking, but they might get offended. So it's I feel the same way about sending each other music. Like, you may think that there's a certain vibe, that going with the song, and then you just, when you're isolated, you might send somebody, hey, put bass on this, and they'll go for a more R&B feel, and you wanted more of a punk feel or something. It's weird.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky.
So you live in New York, right?
Yep, that's right. Lived here about 4.5 years.
Nice. There's a really good brewery out there that I highly recommend you check out if you like the more juicy, hazy IPAs. They're called Other Half. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of them.
Oh yeah, I know Other Half. Yeah, Other Half is, I coming from the Pacific Northwest and, working a lot in Chicago with Russian circles, I felt really spoiled. And then coming out to New York, going to bars, it's like, oh man, like you have 4 beers on tap and like one of them's an IPA, the rest are domestic. It's a very different beer culture out here. And even in the last 4 years, it's definitely taken off, but it's nothing like it was, being in Seattle. And but yeah, Other Half is definitely one that seems to be doing something interesting, and making beer that I actually want to drink. Out here, so many of the bars, if they have a microbrew, it's Brooklyn Brewery, and I'm just not a big fan of Brooklyn Brewery. None of their stuff really does it for me. But yeah, Other Half, their stuff tends to stand out a bit more.
Yeah, with Brooklyn, like I stopped drinking their stuff. I used to drink it back in the beginning phases of my, following craft beer. Like it was always, they had the big bombers of like the number 2 or whatever, and I remember seeing those and just being like, oh man, that looks fancy, I want to try that. And then some of the movie theaters in Miami started carrying it, so they'd let you drink it inside the movie. I'm like, yeah, this is it right here. But now I can't even. I'll see them at a festival, I'll go high five the brewer or the rep or something, and be like, what's up guys, and then just keep going. Like, I've already had my fair share of your beers, I think I'm good.
Yeah, I've definitely had a lot of it being out here. And it's on some level it's not bad beer. Like I can happily drink one, but it's for the price point, I'd probably almost just rather drink a High Life or something. Where it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Do you have any interesting or dumb things that you've done on, like, while drinking beer during a tour or something that you had maybe one too many?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, don't we all? Yeah. I don't know.
Have you ever sworn off like, I'm never drinking again?
Oh yeah. Again, who doesn't? I mean, even now, it's like, I've been on tour for most of this year, and now I'm home. It's like, all right, you know what? I'm gonna lay low for a little while.
Dry out. It's important.
Yeah. And then I went to like Whole Foods the first day I was back, and it's like, oh, they have Daisy Cutter. That's like my favorite beer out of Chicago. I have to get Daisy Cutter. So it's not a hard and fast rule, but I'm trying to be a more responsible adult while I'm home.
Well, I brought this up because I remembered probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. It's Chug. So they offered tickets to a concert. It was one of those festivals that they would put on in Florida with the radio stations that, like Godsmack and Disturbed and Stained. And the tickets were the prize if you chugged an entire 6-pack of Budweiser through a bong.
Ooh. Yeah.
My buddies were like, go do it. And I'm like, oh, fine. And I just did it, and I immediately vomit, just puked everything out after I was done, and then I got free tickets to go see Godsmack.
Well, yeah, for me, Budweiser is already like a really difficult beer to drink, just because that was like the first beer I ever really got drunk on. In high school at a friend's house, he had Budweiser, and I hated the taste of it, so I was eating Doritos while drinking it, just like take a sip of beer. It was so gross. I'd eat a handful of Doritos to get rid of the taste. And then that, it completely resets your palate. That's like brushing your teeth after drinking orange juice or something. So it was just trying to get down like these bottles of Budweiser in between fistfuls of nacho cheese Doritos, and just that taste has never left Budweiser for me. So I can't really do it. But at some point when Bud Light Lime came out, I had this very brief fixation with Bud Light Lime, where I was like, oh, this is like the perfect summer beer. It's light, it's citrusy, it's like a good camping beer.
Okay.
And then I ruined that really quickly. We were out on tour. This was These Arms Are Snakes, but we were out on tour, one of the last tours we did, with a band from Toronto called Day Month Year. And we had a day off, and we decided we were going to play the Hour of Power drinking game. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Oh, no. Tell me.
Hour of Power it's kind of a more old school drinking game, because it's actually kind of difficult to do with modern technology. But what it consisted of back in the day was you had an hour-long cassette tape, and then you dubbed 1 minute snippet of popular songs onto this cassette. So you basically had a playlist of like 60 1 minute long, songs. And every time you would listen to it, and every time a new song came on, you do a shot of beer. So it turns out it's kind of like the equivalent of doing like a 6-pack in an hour.
Oh shit! Yeah. Well, unless you're listening to crust bands or grindcore bands, you could have like 30 beers in an hour. Yeah.
You have to be careful. But we always made mixes that were like, just like dumb radio hits, and so it's like 1 minute of Steal My Sunshine into like 1 minute of More Than a Feeling or whatever, and so it's, when you start off, it's like, oh, having to wait a minute between shots of beer is like a really long time, and then by the end of it, you can't keep up with it because you're just so full.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've beer bonged an entire 6-pack, so I can't really act like that's a feat of a human anatomy. But we did the Hour of Power on tour, and I did it with Bud Light Lime, and it was just tasted like drinking soap by the end of it. Like halfway through it, it was just every shot just tasted like synthetic citrus, like just cleaning agents.
Dish soap.
And, it was just like drinking like watered down dish soap. And people were just like vomiting foam into the hotel kitchenette. Oh, God. It was that officially ended my very brief endorsement of Bud Light Lime.
Did you ever try Tequiza? Remember that shit?
I don't know if I ever had Tequiza. I definitely had Zima.
Oh man, yeah,
Zima's
coming back.
Still, really?
Yeah. They just announced like midway through June they'll be out in stores again. It's like, what?
Why?
That was never good.
Yeah.
I get the nostalgia. Everybody wants to relive the past and all that, but that was not like. It's like Crystal Pepsi. They brought back Crystal Pepsi. I went and bought one, and it was gross. And I'm like, I remember loving this as a kid. I don't know if it's that they changed the recipe or I was just, a dumb kid and didn't know any better.
Well, even when you're a kid and you first try alcohol, I know everyone tends to gravitate more towards the stuff that tastes like candy, and hence, I guess, the popularity of Zima with college kids and whatnot. But it was just, you had one, you're like, okay, and then you had the second one, it was like, no, I can already feel my teeth getting furry, and like that, and like Bartles and James and all that stuff. Just, it's hard enough drinking more than one cider, but let alone like 2 Zimas.
Yeah, I remember in Miami, everybody was drinking in high schools MD 2020s and Cisco's, which is like just fruity malt liquor, like gross. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like cough medicine. I don't know if you've ever seen them.
Ugh.
They have like at the gas station, just like the really shitty, like here's strawberry banana alcohol. It's like,
Yeah, no.
Oh man.
Though that just like reminds me of the brief, Four Loko phase where it's. I remember having like a Four Loko. Maybe like memory serves me wrong, but I think there was like an earlier branding of Four Loko that it was. The caffeine malt liquor.
Yeah. The OG Four Locos, yeah.
Yeah, but they also, I feel like the original one had like wormwood or something in it, or there's like 4 components to it, and one of the components was like especially sketchy. But and this before like the cans had like the weird neon camo thing. It was just like in a white can, and the craze hadn't quite caught on. I remember drinking one of those, and then it feeling. Not only did it taste like cough syrup, but it felt like drinking cough syrup when you were sick, just because you felt feverish and like just
because it has a niacin and taurine, and all that shit that makes your blood pressure go up.
Yeah.
They had to cancel the all that energy giving stuff because people were dying from it.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Some of my buddies actually, Poison the Well?
I don't know them personally now,
but you've heard of the band.
Oh yeah, very familiar.
So Jeff, the singer, and a few of his friends like Eric and Omar and all these dudes, they threw a party when they announced that they were canceling the formula, the original formula. They went around town and they bought all of it. They bought all the cases that they could find, and they threw a giant Four Loko party, and it didn't end well. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, you can't drink that stuff all night, Again, you have one and you're like, right, done.
Yeah. All right, well, going back to some music stuff. I am familiar with you because of Botch, but I started to really appreciate you because of your bass tone in like These Arms Are Snakes and later on in Russian Circles. A lot of my friends agree with me, and we all call you the bass tone master, pretty much.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's you have very distinct different tones for the projects that you're in, and just it always cuts through very well through the recordings, which is something that a lot of bands don't focus on, and you tend to focus on that a lot, which is great. What were some of the bassists that helped you shape your tone, or some of the stuff that you were looking into when trying to find your tone?
Well, I think initially the bass players that I really admired were Mike Watt and Rob Wright. And Mike Watt, I feel like that's kind of an easy answer. It's like that's like the punk rockers Geddy Lee, but just the Minutemen's whole aesthetic of having every musician in the band be sort of responsible for their own frequency range, I thought was really kind of cool, even though I didn't necessarily understand that was the point early on. It was only after seeing documentaries and, learning a bit more about how to dial in an amp and things like that it was like, oh shit, that was deliberate. Okay, that's crazy. But, just the idea that like everyone is sort of responsible for their own sort of, frequency range, I thought was really inspiring, just because bass in general is, I don't know, not the most exciting instrument. It's generally hard to pick out in a mix. And
Right.
It usually just kind of holds down the fort. It doesn't really lend anything to the experience. It's an instrument that I feel like a lot of times it's for people that want to be in bands but don't really know how to play anything, or don't really have like the confidence to be a more active contributor to the band. So I think a lot of it was really just sort of picking up on the philosophy of people like Mike Watt, where it's like, no, like the bass is, it's, in the case of the Minutemen, it's 1/3 of the band, so it should be,
highlighted. Sure,
it should be highlighted. It should make up 1/3 of the sound. But moving into hardcore, that doesn't really make as much sense, just because so much of that music is about having this riff where everyone's locked into it, and it's, if everyone's playing different things and the guitar player's doing all stuff on the higher register of the guitar, it doesn't have the same sort of impact. No one wants to hear. I don't know. No one wants to hear Minor Threat or Black Flag with, Greg Ginn or Jeff from Minor Threat, playing all the top 2 strings. So
yeah.
I think there is some kind of having to figure out how to work around that. With Botch, there wasn't really any room to learn about tones because I didn't have any money. So it was literally just having whatever gear was sort of available to me at the time and making it work. And so a lot of it was just,
Yeah, you could definitely hear your evolution through those Botch albums, like from the first couple ones, American Nervoso, and by the time you guys got to the anthology
Anthology of Dead Ends,
the one with To Our Friends in the Great White North,
that like Romans,
yeah. By the time you got to those albums, you're doing a lot more, and there's a lot more like distortion and sounds coming out, from the bass side of things that you could tell the evolution was there. You were starting to gather some equipment.
Yeah, and I think even then, a lot of the credit kind of has to go to Matt Bayless, who recorded those, because I think he was the one that was sort of able to, to help dial in the sounds on those and help me figure out how to even dial in an amp. Prior to that, all I knew was that you just turned the gain up as high as you could so that it sounded kind of gravelly and growly, and then everything else was a mystery, like using a graphic EQ on an amp, just that was like too complicated. So it was really just about having bright strings and cranking the gain. And so, yeah, a lot of the early years is, in order to get the sound I wanted, it was just like taking off my strings after every couple shows and boiling them in water to clean all the sweat and gunk off of them, and, restringing them and trying to get as much life out of one set of strings while keeping them as clean as possible. And that was as far as my technique really went with tone. But with Snakes, it was kind of nice just because no one really led the charge with songwriting, and so that kind of allowed me to take on a more active role in bringing in riffs and ideas and formulating songs around stuff that was more bass centric. And Ryan is the kind of guitar player who's, I think, just more comfortable doing sort of leads and like accentuating what other people do, as opposed to being sort of a primary principal songwriter.
Right.
So that really gave me a lot of room to push the bass, really. I mean, a lot of the Snake stuff is written around bass lines, and then it's, Ryan doing really high, kind of more solo-y leads on top. And that sort of forced me to have to learn how to dial things in and make the bass actually sound good.
Yeah, you got a bunch of equipment too during that time, like new pedals and stuff like that to shape the tone a bit, right?
Yeah, and again, it was all like a very gradual thing, because neither Botch nor These Arms Are Snakes had money. I was super poor during those bands, and so anytime I got new equipment, it was like a huge investment, even if it was just getting like a new pedal. So, back then I was really into those green Russian big muffs, because they were still easy to find and they were still pretty cheap. You could get them off of eBay for like $50. Whereas now they're like $300 or $400. But those things sounded great. Those were just really gnarly sounding fuzz pedals that were less fizzy and more just sort of mean and growly. And so, I used those a lot in the Snakes years, and then I sort of kept gradually refining things and experimenting with rat pedals and the OCD by Full Tone and things like that, and just trying to find ways of really kind of making the bass not sound distorted, but just sound more crunchy and mean. And I think a lot of that was really my obsession with Rob Wright from NoMeansNo, because I always thought his bass tone was like the ideal bass tone to have. It was just, very articulate, very pronounced. There's a lot of attack, but it never sounded messy or blown out. It just always sounded thick and mean and tough. And so kind of realizing what he did and how he was, running through a Marshall, and then, I think he had like some sort of like grit pedal in the front of the chain for that, but basically it was like a very simple setup, but just, used effectively. That was my model for what I wanted to emulate.
Nice, man. It's funny that you bring up NoMeansNo. Like, the episode, not the previous one, but the episode 17, I talked to Chet Zar. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's an artist that did work for Tool, and he did a bunch of work for Hellboy 1 and 2 and a couple things like that. He does a lot of the dark art.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen his stuff, but he was the one that brought up NoMeansNo for the first time that I've ever heard. And I like to consider myself, I'm a fan of music, and I'm always looking for new music to listen to. And I had never heard of them. And once he told me about it, I looked it up, and I'm like, holy shit. Who the fuck are these guys? Like, how did this happen? How did I not catch on to these guys? And now you bring them up. It's like, wow, okay.
Yeah, they're a weird one. I think I think part of the reason I was really interested in them was because I was in Seattle, and they were a Vancouver, Victoria band, so they weren't that far away. But I think the appeal for me with NoMeansNo when I was a kid and when I first started listening to them is that it still had that sort of sardonic punk edge, like sort of like all the Alternative Tentacles bands, that sort of took a cue from Dead Kennedys, where it's sort of theatrical and sort of snotty, and the vocals are sort of sarcastic and all of that. But it's like the older I got, the more I listened to it, realizing how musically sophisticated it was and how really smart the music was, made it something that like not only maintained its interest for me into my 20s and my 30s, but made me even sort of more obsessed with them. But they're also one of those bands where when I play it around people who've never heard it, I'm fully aware that the vocals can be like super off-putting. They can sound like kind of funky.
Yeah. Well, times. I mean, I hear that. But there's bands like Daughters too, where I love that band, and their vocals are weird as shit too. It sounds like drunk Elvis. But NoMeansNo, after going through listening to the Wrong album, I realized like how much Refused took from them in terms of their style as well. Because I had heard of, obviously, Refused a lot, and listening back to it, I'm like, man, this sounds like what inspired Refused, in my opinion. Yeah,
I never thought about that, but I could see that. They both have that kind of like chunky polyrhythmic thing going on.
Yeah, a lot of polyrhythms, a lot of time changes, and kind of like screamy vocals every once in a while, like kind of talky, like and not so much singing, just kind of yelling stuff at you, which they both have, and that's when it hit me. I'm like, well, I love this band, and it's definitely, I think, something that inspired Refuse for sure. And they might not have heard him ever, because that's one of those things like synchronicity, where like they're in a different side of the country or the world, and they just happen to be doing the same thing.
And they're a weird one though, because I feel like most people know the name, but I feel like a lot of people wrote them off as being part of that sort of, I don't know, just that whole culture of sort of 80s punk that didn't really catch on or remain sort of iconic. I feel like they had a loyal following of people who kept up with them, but I think if you didn't hear about them or see them back in the 80s or early 90s, it was very easy to then sort of dismiss it as like, oh, it's like DOA or something, or it's like, well, if you didn't listen to it back then, there's no reason to listen to it now. But then you find someone that's into it, and people are just like, obsessed with it. And I think a lot of people drew from it, including These Arms Are Snakes, even though Ryan and Steve weren't fans. Like when Aaron Tate from Minus the Bear was drumming for us briefly, we were both big NoMeansNo fans, so we would just steal ideas from them left and right, because Ryan and Steve had no idea, and it was like, oh, that's totally, it's catching up. It's like, oh, I know it's catching up. It's like, cool, all right. You don't care? I don't care. We're running with it. Don't tell the other guys.
That's awesome. It's weird how bands that focus more on like odd time signatures and time changes here and there, kind of like you guys' music, kind of goes under the radar a lot of the times. Like they'll have a big cult following, like Botch, for example, had a big following, but not really. You know what I mean? Like not a lot of, like, every time I'll bring up Botch, like my old band, Dissever, we used to cover To Our Friends in the Great White North at like shows, and a lot of people come up to us and they're like, dude, your new song is awesome. I'm like, well, no, it's not ours, but cool. And it bums me out that, bands like Russian Circles, for example, I mean, you guys do big tours, but you're not on like, stadium tours and shit like that. And I feel that the quality of the music writing and the sound and the precision that goes into the tone and everything, like, you guys definitely deserve more than what you're getting, and it bums me out when bands go through that. Not just you guys, but there's a lot of bands that if you can't bang your head to 4/4 to it, like, for some reason, then it's not going to be on the radio or something, or you're not going to be playing the arenas,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's sort of the nature of the beast, but, at the same time, you have, these bands like Rush or, even like Tool, where it's like they can do the odd time signature thing, but they're able to do it in a way that's so fluid and so smooth that like people don't realize they're nodding their head to something that's in like 7/8. And I think that's like the ideal. Like if you can disguise something that's really sophisticated as being like, really straightforward, I think that's the ideal. I don't like hearing stuff that's like complicated for the sake of being complicated. I like hearing something, and the more you listen to it, you're like, damn, like, wait, what is going on there? I thought I understood what I was hearing, but now I'm hearing it for the fifth or sixth time. I'm realizing that there's a lot more involved. And, I think with music, it's like, I like things to resonate and click right away, but I value music a lot more when it grabs your interest, but you don't fully understand it.
There's layers.
And
yeah.
You're still trying to unlock it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And even something like, even like Rolling Stones or Led Zeppelin. I mean, Led Zeppelin did a lot of stuff in weird time signatures.
Yeah, for sure.
The Ocean or something like that. But Snakes did a recording with Jack Endino, who was sort of the big grunge producer in Seattle from back in the early 90s. And he was talking about all those sort of classic rock records. And his big thing is that the charm in those records is in all of the fuck-ups and the inconsistencies. And so he's a big proponent of, just tracking things live and not worrying too much about, perfecting tempos and things like that. Because he's like, the reason people still love Rolling Stones records, aside from the fact that they're great songs, but what keeps them engaging and interesting is that there's fluctuations in tempo, and that there's notes that aren't really nailed. There's flubs here and there. There's parts where, Mick Jagger sings off key, and all those things, like, even if you're not super conscious of it while it's happening, some part of your brain realizes that that's like out of order, and it's like a puzzle that the brain keeps wanting to solve. So you keep going back to it. And I think all those little things that make records sound really human can sometimes be a distraction to people, where, people want something that sounds perfect and totally plastic and flawless, but they get bored of it super quick. And it just becomes this ephemera that's like, you listen to it twice, you get it, you move on to the next thing. Whereas, a Rolling Stones record or a Minutemen record, like the first time you hear it, you're like, oof, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then you listen to it again and you're like, okay, it's got some hooks. And then, 20 years later, you're still listening to the record and loving it, just because your brain still like can't wrap its head around the fact that D Boon can't sing, And so I think those things, the things that sound human or fucked up or a little wrong, if you can fill your music with that, but still find the appropriate level of polish and hook and entry points for new listeners. I don't know, that's just the balance that you really need to find, and it's hard to figure out where it is sometimes.
For sure, man. It's one of those things. I've had these conversations multiple times with friends that I prefer music that makes me feel things and makes me like want to figure it out and have that passion of like I enjoy being able to nod my head to some off time shit at and memorizing the pattern. Like, for example, like Mastodon has Crack the Sky, the last song, The Last Baron, or The Red Baron, I don't know, Last Baron. There's a whole chunk of it where it's just like, beedle-dee-dee, 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 and you're like, they're just fucking with your mind, and I like to be able to, like, it gives me a sense of satisfaction to be able to follow it. You know what I mean? Like, oh, cool, I understand what they're doing. But there is a fine line between that and stuff like, I can't get into Dream Theater. And I appreciate their talent, they're all super talented, but that's as far as it goes for me. Like, it just sounds like a talent show. Like, hey, check it out, how much faster I can play my instrument than you, and precise, and, and it doesn't feel, to me, I don't connect with it on a more passionate level. Whereas, the first time I heard Sumac, I wanted to explode.
That's the first time I hear a Sumac demo, I feel like my head's gonna explode with a migraine. Like, what the what?
Yeah, dude. When I saw you,
it doesn't make any sense.
I saw you guys at the complex. We actually hung out there for when you guys kicked in. What the thorn in the lion's paw? Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
That song, when that shit kicks in, the entire room was shaking. Like, I felt my chest was about to just implode or something because it was just so intense. And that's the kind of shit I'm looking for. Like, yeah, it's the rhythm is super complicated and you're trying to figure out what the drums are doing, but there's still like a thing there that you just get in. You lock into that wavelength, you know?
Yeah, and I think, you know, I think I was very prepared for people to not like either of the Sumac records, but really, particularly the second one. I was like, I'm fully prepared for this record to come out into the world and have people just be like, "Oof, like, what is this?
Too much."
So I was pretty surprised. Yeah, I mean, it's just like there's so much information, you know, and there's so much. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of repetition, but there's not a lot of repetition in the sense that it comes back around to a chorus or a verse, you know. Again, it's just like, no, like this part's going to go on for 3 minutes.
Yeah.
I hope you like this part because you're going to have to hear it a lot, and then it's never going to happen again. And it's like the kind of repetition I think people generally don't think that they like in music. So yeah, it's been interesting to see people actually latch onto that record, just because, you know, I think we're all really proud of it, but I'm well aware that it's not a record for the masses. So.
Yeah, well, that's mostly Aaron's style too. Like, and back with ISIS, like they had a lot of songs where it was like, here's a riff, and it's going to go on for 2 minutes, and then here's another one, and it fits, but we're not going to go back to that first riff. You know? Yeah. And I had a couple friends that never got into ISIS because of that. They were just like, it's the same riff, you know, and then it just doesn't really go anywhere. I'm like, well, you're not paying attention. That's fine.
Yeah, and I can understand that because there's definitely a kind of linear songwriting that, particularly like in a lot of metallic hardcore bands sort of towards the end of the 90s, and I think maybe Botch was guilty of this at times too, but it's like the song kind of starts in one place and it ends somewhere else, and then you don't get a sense that there's like an underlying theme to all of it. It's just kind of like they had 10 riffs and they just kind of like shoehorned them into each other, and that's the song. And I can totally understand that not being satisfying for people, but I think if you can, I don't know, I like songs to evolve and I like songs to take you on a journey. So it's like, I don't want to just hear A, B, A, B, C, A, B, and have that be the song. You know, I want it to morph and transform and wind up somewhere else from where it started. But, you know, I want it to all sort of make sense together.
For sure.
And that's a trickier way of approaching songwriting, but it's like, yes is close to the edge. If every song can sound like Close to the Edge, that's perfect. You know, there's like a theme that runs through all of it, but it still just goes all over the fucking place and winds up somewhere totally different at the end. And, you know, it still all makes sense and feels like one coherent composition. That's the ideal for me.
Go, man. I got a couple fan questions, and we could do like rapid fire answering because we're getting close to the hour here. I don't want to keep you too long. So, when and how did you get into baritone guitars?
I think that was really just a bridge between, you know, playing bass in a band and playing guitar at home, and you know, having an idea on guitar, but not wanting to dictate it to Mike. Being like, hey, Mike, play this thing that I wrote for you. That's not really how that band works. So it was a good way of writing something at home, and then just basically shifting it down to a register that, you know, makes more sense for what I'm supposed to be doing.
Gotcha. Will there be another Roy record?
Oh, that's okay. Well, there we go. That's random. Probably not. But I wouldn't be opposed. I think it's, I mean, I'd live somewhere else, and Roy was always a very fun band for us to play in terms of writing and composing and recording. It was a very miserable band to play live with because we were a terrible live band.
In what sense? Just like you weren't connecting with each other, or just or with the crowd, or like, what do you mean?
Well, you know, I think part of it was that was a band that was active when we all drank a lot of beer. So if you could tie this back into the whole beer thing, there was definitely a lot of drinking in that band.
Okay.
I think a lot of it too was just, you know, we were all playing instruments that weren't our sort of primary instruments in our other bands. So we weren't great musicians. That being said, Ben's a phenomenal guitar player, and now that's his primary instrument with Helmsley Lee, so I guess I'm maybe talking more about myself in that regard. And a lot of it, I think, was just like things where, you know, we're so used to playing in heavy bands where you turn up your amp as loud as possible and then you yell over it, and that works and that sounds cool. But when you're doing more sort of, I don't know, countrified, lo-fi indie pop or whatever we were doing, it's, if you're playing at top volume and then trying to sing in a baritone voice over it, it just sounds like a mess, and you either sing out of key or you're just not audible at all. And you know, that kind of music is so vocally driven that it just doesn't work. And it was, I think, out of the 100 or so shows we played, there's maybe like 4 shows that I actually felt really good about, and the rest were just like, oof, all right. Need to spend more time actually rehearsing our songs and less time just constantly writing. So
right.
That wasn't a short answer. I'm sorry. How about, there will not be another Roy record, but if it were to happen, that would be cool.
Cool. Botch, do you still appreciate that music, or have you grown to dislike it through the years, as most bands end up like talking about their earlier work and thinking, that shit was terrible, I don't like it. Do you still appreciate that work? Yeah,
I mean, I think there's definitely really early songs that I don't think are all that great. You know, I would say the first 7-inch that we did is maybe not the coolest thing I've played on, but and you know, there's weird little things like on Nervoso where I think that's in general a good record, but I think you can also tell that there were certain songs that were a real focus with songwriting, and other songs were kind of not fully realized. But in general, yeah, I'm still really proud of those records, and you know, I'm really happy when people talk about them and talk about the impact they had on them. The whole point of that band, in a lot of ways, was to make something that people would still appreciate after the band was gone. I think it was, considering how young we were, maybe weird that we were that cognizant of it that early on, but we had definite conversations about how we could make our music a lot more simple and attract more listeners, but it was more important to do something that we thought was challenging and interesting, and then hope that people would still find out about it years later and be intrigued by it. So yeah, I'm stoked whenever people say that they still like that band.
Yeah, I mean, I get I don't know why I get the question, but a lot of times, like, we talk about it and everybody mentions, like, oh, we need another Botch record. And my biggest fear with something like that is just forcing it. You know, there's a lot of bands that break up and they try and get back together and try and do a new record, and it ends up being a little disappointing for me. Like, for example, we mentioned them earlier. I'm not a big fan of the new Refused record. I used to love their previous stuff, but the new one kind of threw me off completely. And same happened with At the Drive-In. I fucking love At the Drive-In, but the new record, I put it on and it played through and I didn't latch on to anything. And I don't want that for Botch. You know, like, you guys get back together because everybody's asking for it, and then put a record out and it's just like, you know? So do you think that would ever happen? Like, do you think a new Botch record would come out, and would it be something forced, or would you guys try and break the, push the envelope again like you did back then?
Well, we still get a lot of inquiries about doing shows and things like that, and there are people in the band that are interested in doing a reunion in some capacity. Though I think the interest there is more just doing a handful of shows as opposed to doing a whole nother record and things like that. Mm-hmm. And but I think there's a pretty, I don't know, the people that are interested are the people that aren't playing music currently. So I think I can definitely empathize with being in that position, as being like, I just want to play shows. Like, I miss playing shows. I miss, banging it out on stage with friends. I totally empathize with that. For me, it's, I feel like everything I've done musically has been a continuation of what I was doing in Botch anyway. So there's not really any burning desire to like drag up old songs and relearn them and then try to recapture what happened, 10 or 15 years ago in the current environment. I just think that's sort of impossible to recreate. So I would rather focus on
newer stuff,
on new things. Yeah. So the idea of doing like a new Botch record, I don't think that would ever happen. Doing shows, maybe, but most likely not, just because I'm certainly not going to lead the charge on it. And yeah, I love that material, and I feel really proud about it. But I do think, every band and every record, part of the beauty of those records or those bands are what they were in the context of their time. So
definitely, yeah,
it's, like Rolling Stones, I think, between 1968 and 1975 were this amazing band, but a band trying to sound like Rolling Stones, even if they nailed the recording quality and everything else, in 2017 would sound stupid. Like I wouldn't want to listen to that. It's part of what makes Rolling Stones amazing, are that they were these British white kids that knew how to play the blues, which was this super weird, edgy, hypersexualized, scary thing for, white Britain and white America. And they were badasses about it. And that's amazing. And that kind of context doesn't really exist anymore. So there's no reason to try to dredge that up in 2017. It's just, those records already exist and you can already enjoy them for what they were. And that's, on a much different, much smaller scale, that's how I look at the Botch stuff. It's like, nope, that belongs in 1999 and people can still enjoy it now, but it doesn't make sense to try to recreate that.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, man. And it's like bringing up that point that I said about Refuse and At the Drive-In, it just feels forced. If you guys ever do want to or start talking about that, I want it. And I'm here demanding shit from you, but I want you guys to do it because you want to do it. I don't want you to do it because, somebody's giving you $1 million to go play Coachella. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's I looked at the Jesus Lizard reunion. I saw 2 or 3 shows on that tour, and I was like, oh shit, this is awesome. I don't have the context of being able to have seen them back in the day because they were banned from Seattle when they were an active band, so I didn't get to see them. But the reunited version, I was like, if this is half as good as they were back in the day, I mean, it's still a great show, and I can only imagine how good it was back then. But that's I don't know, the thrill I got playing in Botch, I get now playing in Russian Circles and Sumac. So I don't think there's additional fire in me to, relearn an old song and, try to put the emotion into that I put into things I'm doing currently.
Yeah. Very few bands are able to pull that off. I mean, one band that comes to mind that pulled it off, in my opinion, is Failure. They came back after 18 years and they're fucking still rocking it. So but that's an exception, a very rare exception.
Yeah, totally.
So yeah, don't do it forced. That being said, I will travel to any state that if you do one show, I will travel to that state to go see it. So.
Well, I'll let you know if that comes up.
All right, and then how often do you get local band demos, and do you even listen to them?
It's not as pervasive as it used to be for whatever reason. And my thing with getting records or getting recordings from people is, if it's a download card, I won't download it. If it's if it's a USB drive, I definitely won't access it.
Yeah, you don't want to put a USB drive and get a virus.
Yeah, exactly. It's dude, no, I don't want that. If someone gives me a vinyl record, I 100% will listen to it. So and we'll most likely hold on to it because I'm a hoarder when it comes to vinyl.
Nice.
My CD player's been on the fritz, so I do have a stack that I haven't listened to. Tapes I try to listen to, but it's generally more about how it's presented. And I don't know, I feel like if someone goes out of their way and they press a record, or they make something that has obvious time and care put into the packaging and presentation, then I'm more inclined to really be curious and interested about it. But if someone's just giving me,
a blank CD with a Sharpie,
yeah, and especially because 9 times out of 10, if that's what someone's giving me, it's oh, these are demos. They don't sound very good, but it's don't give it to me. I don't want to hear something that's not even a good I spend the majority of my day listening to records, and most of the time it's listening to stuff from a somewhat academic point of view, where it's all right, I'm a freelance writer, so I listen to, new metal records for stuff like that. If a friend of mine put out a new record, I'll listen to that, So I feel like I'm doing a lot of music listening that's not leisure.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually like kind of studying something. And the idea of someone just being like, oh, listen to this thing that I'm going to admit to you does not sound good. It's like, don't do that to me.
Yeah, people don't know how to sell themselves, man. Like I've thought about giving classes or maybe writing a book to teach people, like teach young aspiring musicians, like all the wrong things that you're doing. Like, for example, how do you go up to someone and go, hey, here's my demo. It kind of sucks. Well, I'm going to throw that out immediately. Like, there's no, I try to tell my friends all the time, like, if you have the opportunity to meet a musician that you admire, don't start shoving your music in their face. Like, fucking talk to them like a human being and hang out, have a beer. And then if the time comes down the road, be like, hey, by the way, I make music, if you want to check it out one day. That's the easiest or the best way, I think, to approach it than just fucking, oh my God, I love your music, here's my demo.
Yeah, or even like, I don't know, like, a lot of times I'm most intrigued if I find out someone's in a band and they don't talk about it. It's like, I'm in a band too. Yeah, whatever. It's like, oh yeah, I'm like, yeah, we play. Yeah. We tour. And then it's like, well, what fucking band are you in? Now I want to, like, then I'll be intrigued. But yeah, if it's something that's being like sort of foisted upon you as like an assignment or a duty, it's just, it's hard to, I don't know. It's hard to get excited about it. And it's even more a thing where it's like, well, I'm already going into this, like, sort of dreading what I'm about to hear. So it's not even like a good context for it.
Sure.
I don't have any like outstanding stories about any of that stuff. I think it's all the usual, and I don't want to call anyone out either, because I think I do appreciate that people who are starting off in music, it's hard, and the best way to get involved and do things is to be engaged and to go out and go to shows and talk to other people and let people know that you're in a band and all that kind of stuff. So it's not that approach in theory is wrong. It's just that there's definitely
the delivery needs to be better.
yeah, exactly. And it's also just like, well, man, there's not a whole lot I can do for you, but like if you go out to see other bands in your town play and you become friends with them and hang out with them, like you guys can do shows together and you can become friends, and then you guys can do a tour together, and like that's probably going to be way more productive than giving it to me, to be entirely honest. So yeah, you should do that for us.
Yeah, a lot of young dudes, like they think that if they give you the CD, you'll listen to it and put them on a show next time you're in town. And honestly, like that's not even that beneficial. Like I've done that. Back when we were playing local shows in Miami, we opened up for Deicide. That did zero for our career. You know what I mean? Like, cool, we opened up for Deicide. We get to tell people that, but that didn't do anything. None of the Deicide fans wanted to hear me sing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just it's a weird thing. Like just getting on a big national show to opening up a local thing at like 6 in the afternoon is not really the best thing for you. I mean, it's obviously say if you get the offer, take it, but don't shove it down people's throats. It's not worth it.
Yeah, and I feel like that's maybe something that people kind of don't understand, and something that maybe even we've kind of learned over the years. But there's plenty of cases where we're doing like a short tour or something, and we're just like, oh, we'll just take out like our friend's band. No one's heard of them. That's fine. Like we like them. People should like them. They'll come out on tour. We can hang out with our friends, and like it'll be great. And then you realize that no one comes to see them play, and they just come later because they've never heard of them. And then all of a sudden, you're dragging your friends around on tour to play to nobody, and they're losing money because they're not selling any merch because no one's watching them. And you're just like, oh shit, I just kind of set you up for failure. Like,
yeah.
You would have been better off just doing your own like run of shows in local basements, because then people would have paid $5 to come and check you out and hang out and drink beer. But yeah, it's all about baby steps. You're not going to like break your band by like making some huge sudden leap to opening for a bigger band. Like it just doesn't work that way.
Right. Well, like for you guys, I mean, I've seen Russian Circles open up for Coheed more than I've seen any other band. Like you guys have gone on tour with Coheed and Cambria a few times. I know twice, maybe 3 times that I've seen you with them.
Yeah, we've only done 2 tours with them. We did one sort of like weird, one like California out to Florida, and then one full U.S. run.
Yeah, and I just remember thinking, like, trying to get everyone out, because I know all the Coheed fans, they're going to want to go see Coheed. And I'm just like, hey, you should really go in early and check out Russian Circles. Don't fuck around. What are you doing? Like, but was it kind of the same thing for you guys, like opening up for a band that has such a huge, like, feverish fan base that's all they care about? They just want to see Coheed. They don't care about who the fuck's opening.
The weird thing, the phenomenon we saw on Coheed was their fans are pretty obsessive, so their fans do show up early. Like, their fans are there
to get
at doors
to get the closest spot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so there was never an issue of not playing to people. And then I think once we'd go on stage, people were just excited that music was happening. Mm-hmm. So we'd play 30 minutes, people would be stoked. We'd get off stage and it'd be fine. We weren't like necessarily killing it in terms of merch or like next we go on tour and there's always a few Coheed and Cambria shirts in the audience, but it wasn't like we went from drawing 200 people to 700 people. It's just a normal sort of growth over the years. But the weird phenomenon that we saw was the first tour we did with them, Secret Machines were main support, so they played after us. And the next tour, Between the Buried and Me, were the main support, so they went on after us. Mm-hmm. And on both those tours, both Secret Machines and Between the Buried and Me were just kind of getting a lot of shit from the crowd. Like they definitely had their own fans there too, but there's also a contingent of angry Coheed fans. And all we could figure out was just that us being the first band, we'd go on and people were just excited for something to happen. And then when there was another band, it was like,
oh yeah,
right. I'm sick of this shit. I just want Coheed. It was kind of a weird phenomenon.
I saw you guys at the Fillmore in Miami with that Between the Buried and Me and Coheed tour. I went with my girl, and it was me and her and another friend of ours, and there was a couple girls around me. And I remember you guys played, and they were all happy, and then Between the Buried and Me came on, and, Tommy's fucking screaming and crazy fast drumming, and they were just miserable. Like I took a picture and everything. I took like a selfie with this girl next to me that was just face palming the entire time. I'm like, oh, poor girl, you don't understand. Between the Buried and Me is awesome.
That's the weird thing where it's like, I mean, I don't consider us a prog band, but Between the Buried and Me and Coheed, they're both prog bands. Like they're both like heavy prog bands. It's like, why are we faring better than Between the Buried and Me when Between the Buried and Me, as far as I'm concerned, is like the same, obviously very different bands. I'm not trying to say that they sound the same, but they at least, in my mind, occupy the same like sort of broad genre. And it's like,
it has a lot to do with vocals, man. You guys don't have vocals, so that opens up a lot of doors for people that they just appreciate the music. And then, Between the Buried and Me's got the super low growls and screaming that a lot of people don't like. And then Coheed obviously is all singing. So I think that was the disconnect there,
That makes sense.
I enjoyed the fuck out of that tour because it was 3 bands that I liked. So I was like, all right. All right, man. That's about it. That's all the questions I got. And, it's about an hour and 18, so we'll wrap it up. Do you have anything coming up that you want to promote through the podcast? I mean, new albums, new tours?
No, not really. There's a few things in the works, but they're all kind of under wraps right now. So it's kind of, I don't know what I can spill the beans on. We're going to go to Mexico. So we're doing Russian Circles are doing our first 2 Mexican dates in mid-July, Guadalajara and Mexico City. So that's pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
Sumac's going to Japan, but I'm going to assume you don't have a huge Japanese listener base, so it's probably not something we need to focus on too much.
I think you'll be surprised.
Oh, yeah?
I think you'll be surprised.
Cool.
Cool. If anybody, on social media, Russian Circ Band, I believe is how it goes on Instagram.
Yes, I believe so.
Russian Circ Band, CIRC. You are Bubble Guts.
Yep.
What's up with that?
I don't really know. Steve, who sang in These Arms Are Snakes, people would call me BBC because those were my initials. And Steve, at some point early on in our band, did not know what my middle name was. And he's like, what's the B stand for? Bubble Guts? It just stuck. It was absurd. So
Yeah.
that was my nickname for the run in that band, and now it's still lingers around in the Avatar world.
Oh, real quick, just I don't want to keep going back, but These Arms Are Snakes, you guys did a reunion show not too long ago.
Yeah, that was kind of a very spontaneous thing.
Is there any legs on that? Is that going to happen again, or is there going to be is there any talks of jamming or anything like that? Under wraps?
Probably. No, that there's nothing secret there. That was, the whole thing with These Arms Are Snakes was that we were sort of at the end of our tour cycle for our last album, and we were starting to talk about the next record and what that was going to entail, and then we got a couple of big tour offers, and at that point it was just the band relationship had kind of deteriorated a bit. There were some issues with people having some substance abuse issues in the band, and we were always just sort of a break-even venture anyway. And I was the one footing a lot of the money towards things a lot of the time, and so I basically just said, I couldn't really commit to doing a whole nother record, and even doing a couple of big tours that were offered to us. It was something that would require putting money down first, just in terms of getting a van and all that stuff. And I knew that was going to fall on me. So I was like, I can't loan any more money. And so it's like, I'm totally fine to do last shows and things like that, or do whatever people want to do in terms of a final run. But I don't think we should continue putting out records or things like that, or at least I don't want to. So, and that just kind of, that, was a pretty abrupt thing to spring on those guys. And I think because of that, the last few plans that we did have were canceled, and the idea was to sort of regroup after all the dust had settled and people weren't angry anymore. And then it just never happened. So, the guys that had some addiction issues, got help and cleaned up, and everyone's on good terms and, enjoys each other's company again. And in general, relations are very positive. So there's been talk about doing the farewell shows that we had initially planned to do, but it's been, 6 years or so at this point, 7 years. And, I live in New York and Chris lives in El Paso, and it just doesn't really make sense at this point. It's more like doing a reunion. But back in December, Ryan's new band was playing a show with Ben Verellen's new band. Ben briefly played drums in These Arms Are Snakes. And Steve was in town, and I was in town with Sumac. And so I think it was actually Ben who was like, oh, well, at the end of my band set, we should just play one of the Snake songs that I helped write. And so everyone was like, all right, let's do it. And the reunion wound up being 2 songs, and then it was a mess, but it was fun. And yeah, that was kind of it. At some point maybe there'll be something a bit more final, just because with Botch there was time to process the fact that the band was ending, and everyone was able to sort of do what they wanted to do and get what they wanted out of it. But with Snakes, it was just sort of this abrupt end where I kind of pulled the rug out from underneath people, and then people were hurt by that, and then they canceled things that we'd already had set, so I was kind of bummed on that. And then there's definite need for closure there, so at some point that might happen. There might be a couple more farewell shows, but yeah, again, at that point it would almost be like a reunion, and that's just kind of weird. So
yeah, well, yeah. It's funny you brought up Botch. I know you guys made the DVD and everything for the finale, the final push. I have that DVD. I forget the name, but it's like the date, right?
Yeah. And this was our last show. No one knew it was our last show. We didn't know it was our last show. We just played. We didn't even finish the set because a bunch of my gear broke down. And it was after that, it was kind of the beginning of man, this sucks. We can't even fucking finish a set. This is just so cheating. There's no money to fix anything. People aren't even talking to each other. And then it was all right, I don't want to talk about going on tour for another 2 months with things in this state. Things are so broken that they would need to be fixed to go on, and I don't know if that's salvageable. And yeah, there's a very different kind of ending than Botch, where it was oh, you're done with this? All right, well, let's do it right.
Yeah. Oh, shit. Well, cool, man. Thank you for taking some time to talk to me today. I know I've been bugging you about it for a little bit, and, it's cool that we got to do it. And, yeah, hopefully, I looked up just now and see what your next tour is around this area, but next time you're in the town, I'd like to meet up and share some beers. And
let's do it. Let's do some responsible drinking.
Responsible drinking. I'll bring glassware.
Some adult drinking.
All right, man. Thank you again. Thank you for all you've done musically and everything. I mean, you actually sparked my interest in bass. I've been.
Oh, shit.
I was singing in a band for 10 years, and then listening to your work, kind of like, you know what, I want to do this. And I joined a band called Vultures Are Wolves. That's kind of like, they were a 3-piece with no bass. It was guitar, drums, and a vocalist, and they had a really aggressive style, very heavy and fast. And I was like, man, you guys need a bass player. And George, the guitar player, he uses baritone guitars, and he was like, nah, I mean, we don't really need a bass player. I'm like, let me play bass on one of your songs. and we did one show where I played one song, and then after that we were like, yeah, we need to do that. That needs to happen on all the songs. Yeah. So it was, and that kind of sparked my, I went online. I'm like, what does Brian use? And I'm like looking at pedals, like the pickle that you use, and a couple other ones that are a little out of my price range, but I'm slowly trying to build up to that point.
Yeah, baby steps. It wasn't like a thing where I went out one day and bought 10 pedals. It was, piece by piece over many years. So. Yeah. Well, that's awesome, though.
So, yeah, thank you for your time. Thanks for everything you've done, and cheers.
All right, thanks, Eddie.
All right, talk to you later.
Bye.